the most effective and impactful CEOs out there are the ones that truly do practice that humility and that listening better than the ones that are just purely driven by ego and blind faith in their own ability to make decisions. That would be my number one piece of advice. Listen, have a growth mindset, be open to hearing from your people because there is brilliance throughout every organization, and you really want to make sure you're tapping into it.
Welcome to Stickology. My guest today is Ann Melinger, a powerhouse in the world of organizational culture and employee engagement, focused on helping companies bridge the gap between leadership's big vision and everyday employee experiences. As CEO and owner of Bink, she leads a team of senior level advisors who have proven that culture isn't a byproduct, but rather a business imperative. Ann and I met 25 years ago when we were both early in our careers, and we've stayed in touch to geek out on culture and communications, and I couldn't be more excited to have her join us today. So let's dig in. Ann, as CEO and owner of Bink, you have a unique perspective on relationships between what a company says and how it's seen both internally and externally. How do you see a company's internal culture and communications directly impacting its ability to build an authentic external brand that resonates with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, I've worked in this field for the last 25 years, and I've always believed that employees should be the company's top priority. They should be their number one most important audience and most important ambassadors. Because if your people don't believe in your story, it's impossible to expect that customers and the market will. And I think when companies are really aligned internally, right? When people really feel connected to the mission and that energy shows up. It shows up in the way your employees interact with customers. It shows up in the way they talk about the business when they meet people at barbecues. But when there's a disconnect, you can totally see that too, right? It shows up very quickly: service problems, employee reviews, brand credibility, things like that. And I think you start to just see the cracks start to crumble, right? Quality of service suffers, hiring suffers. You start making bad hiring decisions, people start leaving. And we just, there's endless numbers that we of companies that we can point to where this has been the case. And so I really just believe that internal and external brand aren't separate. They're just two sides of the same coin.
How do you coach leaders to build a culture of trust and of transparency, especially when they need to communicate bad news? After all, trust is earned in drops, but lost in buckets.
100%. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've learned over the years of consulting is that I can't coach a leader who's fixed in their mindset, right? In order to work effectively with a leader, there has to be some sense of openness, some curiosity about what could be better, a willingness to change. That is like the first thing. That's a litmus test for whether or not my team and I can effectively work with a leader. And it's because it's exactly what you said. Trust is built in the hard moments. It's a lot easier to build trust when things are strong and you've got great news to share and everything is steadily growing. But especially now in today's environment when hard decisions are just, that's what's happening day in and day out. I really coach leaders to just try to drop the spin, lead with honesty even when the news isn't great, because your employees, they get it. They're not expecting perfection. They would much rather have honesty, transparency, empathy. We see it in examples with layoffs all the time when it's handled really well with a lot of openness and care, especially for the people that are still staying. Things tend to continue on well. Productivity doesn't plummet. Whereas in other companies where it's just sort of glossed over, the employees that stay behind, you can just see the productivity drop. And so I think it's just as simple as here's what we know, here's what we don't know. We'll keep you updated. It can just go a really long way. I think leaders need to be real, they need to acknowledge the uncertainty, they need to listen to feedback. And I think that's how they can earn credibility and trust.
20 to 30 years ago, executives spoke and everyone followed. Companies were very hierarchical. These days, they're much more flat, and the younger workforce expects to have a voice. They don't want to be spoken to, they want to be part of the conversation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I just think people think of, we work in communication, that means we're communicating at people, but You and I both know the most powerful communication strategy is listening and engaging. That's the vast majority of the work that we do with clients. And it's my absolute favorite kind of work, always has been. I think surveys are great, but there's really no better way to like really understand what's motivating people, what's blocking them, than having face-to-face discussions in focus groups, committees, things like that. And however, that is the first step, right? You can't just have a conversation. The follow-up has to be that you're going to act on what you hear and that you're going to close the loop. And that's what leaders really have to do, right? Take the step to ask and then follow that with action, because it's actually worse if you ask and do nothing with the feedback. Whereas employees who really see that their voices are shaping decisions, they're just much more likely to be engaged. They're going to deliver results much more quickly. And so again, it's not about, what communication platform do we have or what's the next big campaign. It's really as simple as creating a dialogue and making sure that people feel heard and connected.
Can you give some examples of companies who have done what you're talking about particularly well and maybe even particularly poorly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about layoffs. Again, it's hard not to think about that in the environment that we're with, in the environment that we're in. And it is those companies that have conversations that really get in and talk to people about here's what's happening, here's why, how are you doing, how are you feeling after these things happen, and versus the ones that don't. And we're also seeing it a lot in AI, right? With AI adoption. I think there's so many companies, there have been examples from Duolingo, where, they said we're replacing everybody with AI, and employees heard about it on LinkedIn. And that is just, it's scary. It creates a lack of trust. And then you see other companies, Shopify has been a great one, where they've had real conversations about AI. This is what we're doing. We're adopting it to help make you better, you as an employee better, versus replace you as an employee. And so those conversations and really listening and taking the time to understand where are my people when it comes to AI can really, again, make a difference in building trust and ultimately unlocking better results.
Well, you can't have a business conversation without AI coming up. On one hand, it's an accelerator. It allows companies to rethink how they're doing business across efficiencies, creativity, data, etc. On the other hand, it can be overwhelming because it has the ability to redesign how we do business and the role of every employee in the organization. Employees are asking what they'll be doing next year or will they even have a job. Can you talk about how companies are communicating effectively with their employees about this right now?
Yeah, Shopify is a great example. Another really great example is Thomson Reuters. And I think that's a really good one because it's a company they do a lot of journalism, and no industry I think is more afraid of AI than journalists. And they've really recognized that their AI adoption strategy is actually being driven primarily by the chief HR officer. They really see it as a people challenge, not a technology challenge. So that right off the bat, seeing who's leading this charge is to me a real differentiator, because it's not a technology rollout. It is people and it is culture. I believe the culture is going to be either the greatest barrier or the greatest accelerator to your company being able to make the most of those AI investments. And again, it comes to, you've got to start with listening to your employees, finding out where they are. Where are they on that fear spectrum? For sure, everyone is kind of in this place of a little bit of fear and disillusionment. The headlines are screaming, the layoffs are happening. There is fear, but you want to understand, what is the fear? Where is it coming from? And really get in and do that listening, and then build a real people first strategy around it. You've got to create time for innovation, for making mistakes. And I think one of the smartest things that I've seen from companies are those that are willing to take a dip in productivity temporarily with the knowledge that it's going to pay off with increased productivity later. So
Yep.
just taking time to slow it down, discuss the fear, create space to experiment, and then know that things will soar later.
So I want to shift back to something you were saying earlier. It's something I've been on my soapbox about lately. When we look at the best places to work, we see a clear pattern. They're hyper focused on their people. And we see why. When people feel empowered, companies experience one third of the level of their competitors' turnover. They see 8 times more revenue per employee. They outperform the S&P by 3.5 times. Who wouldn't want these results?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what you're saying, and I feel like I would love for you to just get up on a soapbox and preach that to the world, because I agree, and it's always been the case, and I do think more and more companies really do understand it, that having a clear vision for where we're going, having a clear sense of mission and purpose that shows up over and over in the employee experience, having a clear sense of values that employees understand and they see it translated into their day-to-day experiences, and they see it in the ways that they're recognized and the way that they're promoted and compensated. That is so powerful. The thing that I hear more than ever from companies right now, more consistently and clearly than ever, is just employees feel afraid and they feel confused and they feel lost and overwhelmed and disconnected. And when you're in those moments of uncertainty and fear, it is those foundational things around what is our purpose, where are we going, and what are our core values that can just bring everyone back into alignment. We can just push away some of that noise and some of that fear, and let's stay anchored in what matters. That's our true north, and that's what can kind of keep people aligned. I always think of it as like we're able to stay aligned, and when all these random things come at us, they don't pull us off track. We stay on track. And I think that that is one of the most powerful, sounds basic, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do, is get really clear on who are we, where are we going, and how are we getting there, and creating that sense of consistency. It's no surprise to me at all that results follow from that.
True purpose is demonstrated by how people work and make decisions, not by the words on a poster. You can't just put posters around the office and be like, this is our purpose, this is our mission, these are our values, and expect everyone to adopt them. It's not going to resonate. How do you advise clients to get everyone aligned and make sure that everyone's adopting purpose, mission, or values? Getting down to the nitty gritty, what are some of the tactics that you recommend or have recommended over the years?
It's a great question, and I love how you said they can't live on posters. Values can't be wallpaper. I'm a big fan of the show Severance. I don't know if you ever watched it, but
Yep.
one of the things that was super creepy about that show is a really dysfunctional workplace that had really awesome posters everywhere proclaiming what a great place to work it was. And it would just created this like very eerie sense of like something isn't right here, cognitive dissonance. And that's exactly what happens on obviously a bit of a less of an extreme, but it happens in so many companies now where you just see these things and they're in stark contrast to what people are experiencing day to day. So it goes back to a lot of what we've already talked about. You have to start with research, listening to your people. How are they feeling? Do they see that purpose? Are they aligned with it? Are they being rewarded by performing in a certain way? Do they understand what's expected of them? That's the piece that has to be the foundation of any of this work. Start by listening. Then from there, you really have to make sure that the leadership team is aligned around what those things are, because that's another place that it can start to fall off. If the communications or HR team is just leading the charge and putting posters up, and then the senior leaders are not aligned with that and are making decisions and showing up in ways that are out of alignment, it immediately falls apart. So we have to take the time to get leadership on board with it, aligned with it, in agreement with it. And then the final thing is really one of the things we love to do with clients is let's map the entire employee experience, from even from pre-hire. What are people seeing and learning about you when they're learning about you as a company, thinking about coming to work there? What are they experiencing in the interviews, onboarding, orientation, interactions with their managers? Looking at every single one of those moments and finding opportunities to reinforce the purpose, the values, the vision, and how you connect to them as an individual employee.
I love that. As a result, you're building trust and you're aligning everyone from day one through hopefully day 10,000. However, sometimes crises happen, sometimes things go wrong. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, that's the time when you need trust to be in place. Can you talk about some of the common mistakes that you see organizations make in the midst of crises? And what advice you have for leaders who want to keep or rebuild trust, engage their employees, engage their customers?
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about it a little bit before. I think the biggest mistake that I see is staying silent. Leaders often think that if they wait, something will blow over, or there are simply things you can't communicate. And I certainly understand that. But the thing is, the risk of staying silent creates mistrust faster than whatever the crisis is itself. So my advice is always to communicate early, even if you don't have all the answers, and to talk to employees first. I mean, the fact that things are still leaking out before employees know in this day and age is so shocking to me. Everything will get out. Everything will that goes out will get in. So it's so important to talk to your employees first, share as much as you can, show humility, act on your values, and give people as much of a clear path forward as you can. And in fact, a crisis, you can emerge from that stronger with more trust than you had before you went in. So I think it's about not just saying what needs to be said, but really acknowledging what's happening, acknowledging that it's ugly, and doing it with real authenticity. Don't just say we're a family and we don't like laying people off, but really acknowledge it in a way that is real and honest and humble. The more of that you can do, the better.
Now, we've talked about the companies that you work with. Let's talk about your company. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the culture that you've built, what you're most proud of, what's on your checklist to do even better. I'd love to hear about your experience as a business owner and an entrepreneur.
I mean, to me, I think the thing that I love most about being a business owner and having a small business compared to some of the massive enterprises that we work with is the ability to give the people on my team the opportunity to just make a difference. We're small enough. If you have an idea, if you see something that you want to try or something that's not working, let's just try it. There's no reason not to. We've all chosen to be a part of a small business versus being in a larger enterprise because I think we get a lot of energy off of that. And so, really taking the time to learn from each other, collaborate with each other, and try new things has been great. On the flip side, I think what's always a challenge for us, but something we rise to, is we are a small business, but we're advising larger enterprises on how to have an amazing culture and what you need to do to create a positive employee experience. We have to do that for ourselves. So we don't always have all the same resources as our larger clients do, but we do everything we can to make sure that we're taking time for meaningful connection to one another, learning and development, meaningful time away from the office, being together through team building, things like that. So it's a challenge, but it's one that, we have a lot of fun with trying to meet.
The companies that lean towards innovation and creativity, towards giving everyone a voice, those companies are agile and they're often outpacing the big giants. So while your company might not have tens of millions of dollars for training or HR initiatives, you have a different philosophy, a different approach that allows you to maximize your employees' potential. Let's rewind a little bit in your career, thinking about your history as an employee. What are some of the most influential moments, whether it be individual bosses or cultures, that have really stuck with you and helped you build the business that you want to run and the businesses that you want to advise?
It's a great question. And what's really interesting about my experience is that I own and run this company today, but I was an employee of this company before I owned and ran it. And so I think for me, that has made me a very different kind of leader because when I first joined it, I was an employee. And so I've been in my employee's shoes. I bought the business many years later. And so I got the opportunity to really see and feel what it was like to be an employee. I got to experience some of the challenges and frustrations that come with that. I got to see when I raised my voice that it was heard and that it actually made a difference. And so being able, it's often very difficult for a leader to put themselves into their employees' shoes. And so I just feel like it's such a great blessing that I had that opportunity and am able to bring that into my work every day. I often think back to some of the very early days, even when we worked together early in our career. And I think the opportunity to be in an office environment and learn and work from each other is something that really shaped who I am as a professional. That's definitely something that I grapple with now. My team is fully remote, has been for many years since before it was cool. And I think that can create some real challenges. We learned from each other by seeing each other in the office every day and having conversations in the hallway. And so without that, I do have to be much more intentional about creating meaningful connection with my team virtually, creating opportunities in person to have those meaningful connections and the innovation. Because I do believe, especially for folks earlier in their career, being surrounded by smart people physically and being able to learn from smart people just by overhearing how they interact and how they think is really important. And so that's something I've had to really intentionally bring into my work as well.
Some say that the best leaders serve their employees, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Beyond yes, they should or no, they shouldn't, can you talk about what that even looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Simon Sinek has a book called Leaders Eat Last. It's definitely something that I have adopted in my own leadership philosophy. I think it's so important that when you can lead people in a way that they feel that they have a voice, that they feel empowered, that they feel motivated to give, they're so much more likely to stay loyal. They're so much more likely to really tap into their own inner well of knowledge and expertise and be willing and to actually have the desire, the innate desire to share that with the organization to keep it moving forward. Again, leaders, I think so often we just feel all this pressure that we have to do things, we have to know things, we have to be the ones sort of carrying everything. But in reality, if you can step back and be the kind of leader that creates a sense of safety and creates an environment where employees do feel like they can just step into their expertise and grow and thrive, you're ultimately going to have a much more successful enterprise, a strong culture, and that's what's going to deliver the real results.
And what's your advice for a new leader who wants to build a team that not only delivers results, but also cultivates a thriving culture where people want to stay and grow?
I think it has to be listening. So often as leaders, and I've experienced it myself, we feel this tremendous sense of pressure that we have to stand up and have all the answers, and that people are looking to us for answers. And truly, what people are looking for from leaders is people who listen, openness, trust. Yes, you have to have a vision. At the end of the day, you're the one that's making the decision, and you have to have a strength and confidence in that vision. But being humble, being open, listening, to me, those are the best kinds of leaders. It's something I've worked on for many years in my own growth and path. And it's something that when I see it with companies, when I see the most effective and impactful CEOs out there are the ones that truly do practice that humility and that listening better than the ones that are just purely driven by ego and blind faith in their own ability to make decisions. That would be my number one piece of advice. Listen, have a growth mindset, be open to hearing from your people because there is brilliance throughout every organization, and you really want to make sure you're tapping into it.
That was a fantastic conversation with Ann. It made it crystal clear that when companies design culture with intention, everything else follows. Here are my three takeaways. Number one, treat employees as the number one audience and most important ambassadors. If your people don't believe your story, the customers won't either. Number two, build trust through dialogue, not just communication. The most powerful strategy is listening and engaging. This means face to face discussions, acting on feedback, and closing the loop. Lead with honesty and empathy, especially with bad news, to earn credibility. Number three, values must be lived, not just displayed. Define core values, the we statements, and then boil them down into specific actionable I statements. Build them into core competencies, compensation, and a clear recognition framework to ensure they are rewarded and reinforced from pre-hire through promotion. And provided some strategies that every leader can implement tomorrow. I hope this conversation was as impactful for you, the listener, as it was for me.